Hello, everyone. So first of all, thank you so much for coming. We are so excited to have you today. To give you a small introduction of myself, my name is Naya Macklin. I am currently a software engineer, and I am also a political strategist and a abolitionist, a proud abolitionist as well. My role here is that I am the founder and CTO of Afros in AI. And Afros in AI is a computer software company that provides software solutions to lower income and diverse populations, both here in the Boston area as well as nationally. So everyone, first of all, welcome to Evaluating Entrepreneurship is starting a company right for you. So today I just wanted to give a very small intro to our incredible panelists. So we have some brilliant founders for you all and entrepreneurs who are in the field who took their idea and made it something spectacular. On our panel, we have Ignacio Castro, and they are the founder and CEO of Get Hackers, as well as the managing director and the managing director of the Founder Institute of Boston. So there's Ignacio. We also have Jacob Futong, and Jacob is a managing partner for Jamani Ventures. And then lastly, who's going to be joining us in a moment, if not here currently, yes. So lastly, we have here Nelly, and Nelly Moski-Luo is the founder and CEO of Folia Health. So today we're going to be hearing from these incredible panelists. Just to give you all an idea of the structure of our conversation, each panelist is going to talk for about 5 to 8 minutes on their journey and their trajectory into entrepreneurship and founding their companies, and then we're going to jump into Q&A. So as long as that's cool with y'all, let's jump in. So first of all, I'd love to ask Ignacio, just to give us an idea of how did you start out? How did you start to found your company? What are some thoughts that you have there? Some pieces of advice you have for our audience here?
Sure, and can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So thank you for having me. It's the Startup Week in Boston. Startup Week Boston. It's a great event, and I think the team has been doing a great job. So congrats and kudos to the team. And as Naya mentioned, I have a couple of different hats. I'm going to share my perspectives from not just personally from what I've done in my past with different companies, but also as the managing director of Founder Institute. Founder Institute is an early stage accelerator program, and all we do basically is helping first-time founders to work on their company and launch their business, right? So we've been doing this for about 5 years here in Boston. I did that a couple of years additionally elsewhere. So I have lots of experience seeing individuals come in and kind of come up with a dream and launch their company and their startup. And I also have seen many more because our program is really challenging, and we have about 40% graduation rate. So I have seen many more kind of coming through our doors and then decided that entrepreneurship was not for them, right? So it's very important that before I start giving advice, let me give you a little bit of my background, right? So I'm originally from Costa Rica. I moved to Boston in 2010. And before moving to Boston, I had a few different companies back in Costa Rica in the consulting space, in the retail space, and then when I moved to Boston, I decided to move back to more of the corporate world. And right now I'm in the process of transitioning and looking to launch my latest company, Get Hackers, as I mentioned before, right? So some experience, good and bad, that I can share later on. And I'm in the financial services, IT, kind of that's my expertise. So, going back to some advice, right? I mean, I think that one of the first things that you need to decide is when to do it. and you have to be prepared. And you don't. This is something that is really hard. Is really hard, and you should not take it lightly. It's a big decision. So one piece of advice that I always have for people is the challenge is that the more you wait, the more difficult it is, right? It gets harder and harder as you um, move on with your life, and and then so the sooner you do it, the better, right? The sooner you do it, the better. But also, I mean, you cannot rush it either, right? So, um, when I mean things get in the way, right? Family, your responsibilities, but if you prepare yourself, I mean, I mean, there's different ways you can do it, right? It, you cannot assume that right off the bat you're gonna have a round of funding that's gonna you're gonna get a salary or anything like that, right? You're gonna have to invest yourself first, before you go and ask for funds for money from others, right? And the way to do that is by saving, and there's many different ways, and we can talk depending on what the questions are later on. But you can even start running a more of a lifestyle business, a consulting business, do services for a while, and then eventually start building your product in parallel. For example, that's another route. Um, but either way, right? I mean, when you decide to jump and do it, you need to have all the resources, you need to have all the setup in order to be successful. So
Gotcha.
a few, go ahead.
Oh, no, 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 that's incredible. And I so appreciate you talking about like preparation as being the key and starting as soon as possible as being the key. I think we're going to dive right into, like what does preparation actually look like. And I also want to give Jacob a small moment to tell us a little bit about what his impetus was for creating the company as well, and what pieces of advice that you would give to younger folk who are trying to come into this space.
So thank you guys for having me. Thanks to the Startup Boston team. And Nia, you've been doing a great job so far. So thanks for for leading us in this session, and I'm grateful to be here. I think kind of what Ignacio mentioned, the things will piggyback from that, but I know we'll talk more about it later. But one thing that I believe, and I'll just give a little bit background on myself. I came from the science background, so I did biology undergrad in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, at Marquette University. And at that time, this was like 10 years ago, I wanted to be a doctor. But, I actually learned a lot about, the ability to think from a scientific perspective, right? And at that time, I didn't know that would be invaluable when you're starting a business, because people always think like starting a business, the process is just like you just dive into it. But actually, it's a scientific process. There are certain things that you need to really know and understand before you actually build a business. And most of the time, as an entrepreneur, you always have to have a framework that you look at, a process that you look at. And for the first company I started, this was back in 2012, it failed miserably. And I don't even want to talk about it here, but I lost a lot of money, and I actually lost a friend because I started with a very close friend of mine. And if I look back at that time, what happened was that we didn't have a process in place. We didn't have a system in place. We didn't have a framework. It was just all about, diving into an idea without really thinking through about how is this gonna work? Like, how are we gonna get the first 20 customers? How are we gonna get the first 50 customers? How are we gonna get the first 100 customers? And I do think, even though it was a really bad experience, and I know in many entrepreneurship sessions that people attend, they always talk about, there's this failure that I had to go through to make it, to where I am now. But sometimes these failures are really painful, and sometimes you don't need to go through all these failures, right? You can actually think, and I think maybe that's why most of you guys are here. There's a framework, and I'll go more into it so that the other speakers can talk about their own stories and stuff. But there's a framework that you have to think about in the process of starting your company. And I'll say there are three things. One is that you have to think about, are you the right person for that business? When I say right person, it's not just the skill set, but like emotion wise. There's some businesses that like they have very low turnout rate. There's some that have high turnout rate. You need to have the emotional cycle that actually aligns with the type of business you're building. So like right business, like, do you have the right skill set, but most importantly, do you have the right emotional wavelength? And I think that's very, very critical. I think the second piece is, and this is more about, do you have the right environment to start a business? So one thing has to do with like your co-founders. Like, do you have a founder that really understands you, understand where you're coming from, understand how the nature of what you can provide to the business? And environment in the sense, like, you know, what the startup boss is doing. Like, do you have the right people around you to give you the right mindset, also the right support to build a business that can thrive? And I think the last and the most important thing is, do you have the financial capital to actually have a time frame that you don't make any money, but you can still survive, right? So you have to downsize, and that's something that I'll try to go more into that. And it's actually part of the process as you're building your business. So those three things, think about it when you start a business, but also how you develop the processes to build your startup.
That's incredible. And I hope everyone's taking notes. The first thing Jacob had mentioned, making sure that you are the right person to be doing this work emotionally. The second thing, making sure that you have the right support, right? Support systems. And then third, do you have the financial capital in order to go into this and also like not have enough, the finances. Do you have the right financial capital just in case you don't make money during the first couple, first timeline for your business is starting off? That's incredible. And I'm really excited to dive into that further with you, Jacob. And Nell, I know that Nell has joined us on the call. Nell, can you just give us what your impetus was for starting up your company? Just give us some background about what you're doing, who you are, and we'd love to talk with you more.
You're on
Nell,
mute,
I think
Nell.
you're muted. Okay, I was trying to do it through my.
I think you were still muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here with everyone. So I'll keep it, kind of brief because I know there are some discussion points, but long story short, I am what I like to call an accidental entrepreneur. I never intended to start a company. It was definitely not something that I had planned, my life around or trained for in any way. Where I come from a similar background as someone who's been, really focused on scientific questions. And what happened for me was that there was something that I really wanted to work on. And it became clear to me that the most straightforward way to do it, and probably the best way to build it, would be as a for-profit company. And specifically what I was looking to work on was the development of a better and more useful data set for understanding how individuals who have complex diseases respond to therapies and how they experience their conditions over long periods of time. And that's information that is incredibly valuable to giving that person a more precise and better treatment plan, help them to have the best care possible. And it's also very important from a research perspective. And I came to this realization through, my academic and professional work. I was a student who studied public health, and then I went into consulting for a couple of years. And when I was considering going to do a PhD in epidemiology, looking at this question, I realized that it actually would be more straightforward to do it through the lens of business. And it's, I become a little bit more comfortable than I was, as a student with understanding how for-profit businesses operate and had some great mentors who convinced me that it was kind of the right thing to try. And so for me, this entire experience stemmed from an interest in a particular idea, and then realizing that starting a company was the right way to pursue that idea. And I think that, I don't think that that's better or worse than other paths to entrepreneurship, but it has definitely, had a major impact on how I've experienced it. So for me, I think I spend a lot of time learning how to be an entrepreneur, right? And the things that come more naturally to me are the parts that are more product focused for my company. And I know that there are, different types of entrepreneurs, and some people are really kind of the born salesperson or the born business person, and they, look to hire or look to get better at the product side. And I'm kind of the opposite. And it's been great. I think what I would say in general as, maybe topics for further discussion are that my co-founder and I have both found that if you aren't very passionate about the idea that you're going after, it would become just way too difficult. This is not like a simple path. And if what you're looking for is a job where you have a lot of self-determination, if you're looking for, the ability to kind of write your own future, it's great, but it's not the easiest way to do that. Go to law school and start your own law practice, or there are many different ways to do that are not so uncertain. This particular path, starting a company, is one of the more uncertain things that you can do. And I would only advocate for it if you have something specific that you really want to build, that this seems like the best, and this seems like the best way to build it. And the way I would test that feeling is, if someone else built it, would you have the feeling of like, oh, I missed out on building that thing? Like, I could have built that as well or better, and I wish I had. And if you feel that way, then I think it's worth considering. If you don't feel that way, it's definitely more trouble than it's worth. So it's kind of that's how I would think about it. And for us, not to be negative about it, for us, that's definitely been true. And I would, do this 100 times over. But it's because Dan and I both are, very married to the concept. And if someone else were to build it, we'd just be kicking ourselves for the rest of our lives. So that's why, this has been the right path for us.
Wow. Y'all, we have some incredible panelists. This is incredible. I really love what you said, Nell, and specifically thinking about this was one of the most uncertain things that someone can do, right? It's a huge leap for folk to consider starting their own company and becoming an entrepreneur. I'd actually love to release this poll that I'm thinking of. I want to know from you all, yes, what do you think is the biggest barrier to starting a company for you? So this is personally for you. What is your biggest barrier to starting a company, or how does this relate to you? And so I'd love for folk to think about this question as we move into some of our other questions. And I'm wondering for the panelists here, actually, what do you think is the biggest barrier to starting a company? Did it have to do with finances? Did it have to do with time? Was it finding the right idea? Was it not knowing how to be an entrepreneur, like Nell was talking about? What was, for you specifically, what do you think was your biggest barrier to starting the company?
And yeah, and guys, if you don't mind, I would like to answer that question, but also build on what Nell and Jacob were saying, right? And I mean, is this even the right path for you, right? And I'm gonna post a link in the chat because unfortunately, I'm gonna be talking about the Founder Institute a lot because that's what I breathe a lot. But we have done a lot of work on this space, and there's even a tool that we use to understand what the entrepreneur's traits, personality traits are, right? So we call it the entrepreneurial DNA, and there's actually, that's part of our recruitment process. And I'm not going to talk a lot about the Founder Institute in that sense, but I think there's a lot of resources that we have that can be useful for this audience. And so if you are even thinking about this, I will encourage you to go and take this test. and get some feedback. I mean, understand what your personality is, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. And one of the things that we have seen in our work is that there's different things that you have to have in order to be a good entrepreneur, right? I mean, you have to be coachable, you have to be persistent, you have to be there's a term that we use, which is fluid intelligence, which is you always have to be learning, you always have to be kind of researching and trying to figure out things as you go. So, and there are more, so I'll encourage you guys to go to this link. But and also the other thing that I would say is, I mean, we are in Boston, right? I mean, this is an amazing city with I mean, I would say unlimited, almost unlimited resources, and there's everything that you need for, depending on the stage in which you are, right? I mean, if you are very early, just starting, there are many different resources in the city, but as you continue to grow, there's always all type of resources that you can go to and get help. And going back to your question about barriers, right? I mean, I think sometimes the financial barriers is one that comes to mind and comes to kind of conversations. I mean, I cannot quit my job. I cannot just go and do my own company, right? But and going back to my earlier comments, right? You can start your company even without, I mean, even while you are still working, right? I mean, in order to be successful in your company, you have to build an audience. You have to build a support group, and you can start doing that with very simple and easy things that you can do, which is basically even with starting a blog, right? I mean, you can start writing about what your interests are. You start kind of getting feedback from people and letting people know what you are interested in, and start building. I mean, getting an audience, and I can talk about a little bit about that later, but there's different people that you want in that audience, but you need to start building that support group as you go, and that will de-risk your plan to start your company a lot, because maybe what you're thinking, and this happens a lot, right? We see a lot of founders working on something that it's already out there in the market. Maybe they didn't research, they didn't know about it. But if they will have be more open and share about what they were doing, maybe someone will have told them that, I mean, look at this, look at that, right? So just my I mean, I know there's many barriers, but I think one of the most important barriers is just ourselves, right? Just making the decision and finding a smart way to do it, right? I mean, with all the different challenges and circumstances that you have, but there's always if you really want to do it, there's always a way to do it.
Love that, Ignacio. Love that. So thinking about, is this the right path for you, and making sure that if it is, making sure to fine tune your ideas, and also figuring out whether you have an audience for this. So how can we get an audience to support your ideas as well? Jacob or Nell, do you have any thoughts on what your biggest barriers were to creating your company?
Ladies first.
Now I have to figure out how to unmute again. We're good? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that entrepreneurship has opened my eyes to is the importance of a network and how hard it is to break in without it. I have been very fortunate and very privileged in just what my opportunities have been. I went to Yale as an undergrad. I think that has had a huge impact on my ability to be able to meet the right people just through networking. It's actually still been really hard, right? Like there are lots of people who, no, there are not a lot of people. There are some people who have kind of built a network because their parents or someone else that they know well, you know, they were previously business people in Boston, or, you know, they have this type of network that they can get plugged into. Those people tend to have an easier time, and the more that you're able to access a network like that, the easier your experience will be. for me, I think the first year of Folio was basically network building. And as someone who's not really a super enthusiastic networker, it was something I had to learn how to do. I can't imagine how hard that would be now. At least I was able to go to events. And I went to a lot of events, but for me, that was the big uphill climb, right? To figure out how to, and then once you're able to surround yourself with people who can support you financially, you know, we met a bunch of angel investors who have been with the company, but then also with advice and helping you to learn. It's then just important that you know when to ask questions, and you always ask questions when you're in doubt. But I think it's just so important to build that foundation, and it's not just within your company. It's not just finding a co-founder. It's having a community of people that you've met and that know you. And then the tricky part is, and this is, you know, for me, like, it's not something that comes naturally to me. The tricky part is keeping up with them. And it's not enough to have one good meeting, right? You have to keep everybody in the loop. You have to be constantly nurturing that relationship, just like you would with your friends or family. And so you don't want 100 people in your close network. You wouldn't be able to manage it, but you know, a couple dozen is, and luckily Boston, I think, is way more accessible than most places in that way. There are resources, and if you're interested, you know, please send me an email afterwards. I'm happy to connect you. But I think that to me is the biggest first hurdle. And then once you get to that point, it's like you're standing on people's shoulders a little bit, and they can help you. So that I think was that first. And for me, I didn't end up taking the jump and leaving my job until I had started to build that network a little bit, and I had the assurance that I wasn't going to be going it alone. Yeah, and it's a good thing to connect it to what we've been saying. It's an easy, good first way to test your idea too, you know, because you're having to do that when you're building that network.
So many golden nuggets of so everyone, don't forget to nurture your network like you would your friendships. Very, very important. And thank you, Nell. Jacob, any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think, Neil hit it right. I mean, what Neil and my fellow panelists mentioned is really important, and it stems right into once you've started the idea and you've actually established the business, right? I think one thing for me, and I think for most people I've interacted with, so I work a lot with African entrepreneurs, right? And I think one thing is like the fear of uncertainty, right? There is, I mean, I feel like I'm very privileged. You know, I came from a household that I was just lucky enough that I could come to the United States, you know, go to undergrad, go to a private business school and all that. But at the same time, it's like, how do you just do something that you don't really know? You can't project, like, this is what's going to happen in the next year or 2 years. And most of the time, before you want to even start a business, you just have to let it go. Like, you literally have to, the image you have in your mind of the reality of what your future will be like, I personally had to let it go and say, I will not have like a very, you know, fancy job that I can estimate how much I'm going to make in the next 3-5 years. I'm just going to plug in. I'm going to go to Uganda. I don't know what to expect. Anything can happen. And just do it. Because if you can go through that, if you can defeat that psychology of like, okay, I don't know what is going to happen, I think that's, for me, is a very critical step to actually be an entrepreneur. Because at the end of the day, you just have to do it. I know there is some reality that you have to adjust and say, okay, what's the fine line that if something really goes out of hand, I have to come back to normal, right? I need to come back to that center. But at the same time, it's like, the more you think about it, the more barriers you create in your mind. And I think, you know, one of my parents mentioned, you come up with so many things of not to do anything. And you'll be very logical. You come up with very logical reasons why not to start, very logical reasons why not to go into it. And you will convince yourself that, you know what, there's so many barriers to start, and you will not do anything. But, you know, if you start it, if you just do it, bear in mind that, let me put it this way, what's the worst that can happen if you don't do it, right? I mean, if you become homeless, at least hopefully you have family and friends that you can go stay with, and in that you can sleep on the couch or stuff. I mean, the worst that will happen is not gonna be that bad. I don't even think you'll be homeless. I mean, if you lose all your money and stuff, I'm guaranteeing that there are a lot of ways that you can step back up. So I think it's just like that psychological mindset that you just have to defeat. Like, and say, hey, I just have to do it. And I'm not saying that your fear will go away. No, it's always there. I mean, I still have, this sleepless nights and all that. But I think when you do it and you get that move, that you get the business going, you become more assured of what you're doing, and that creates a lot of certainty with time. So just that psychological, that defeat yourself and say, I can do it, and just study. I think that's very helpful.
Oh, so much good information here. I think that segues really well into this question from Lauren, who asked, and maybe one of us can take this question. If you have a few ideas, how do you focus on one idea and run with it? Would one of you like to touch on that?
My super short answer is, if it's not obvious, none of the idea yet. I have some friends that I think are more the type who are just really interested in starting a company. And I think they tend to have more, big ideas. They're always running around their heads, and they're that type of person who, can always looks at something and can see how to improve it. And I think, that's not exactly me. So, part of this is kind of speaking from what I've heard them say, but you have to make a huge commitment to the one that you choose. And if you're not willing to work on it to a little bit of a crazy degree and push it a little bit further than it seems like it should go, then nothing's ever going to work. And so if you're not fully bought in from the beginning, or if you always are kind of thinking, it's almost like dating, I feel like, a little bit. If you're like, maybe it's not gonna work, the marriage isn't gonna work, right? That's kind of how I would conceptualize it.
That's huge and hugely helpful.
So yeah, and another thought there is, I will fully agree with Neil, right? I mean, if you are not fully committed and you are not passionate about it, you probably shouldn't do it. But you also have to be mindful and careful with married to an idea, right? I mean, and I give you a little bit of a perspective here, right? We get a lot of people that comes with ideas. They don't know if that's the right idea or not. And when you are in this journey, you have to maximize for learning, especially in the early stages, right? You always have to be putting out hypotheses of what you are trying to do, and try to prove those hypotheses as quickly as you can in a really fast-paced process. And so because I mean, the worst thing you can do is just push with one idea because that's what you want, and even start building for an idea. I mean, that's very typical for programmers, for example, or developers, to just want to build something. They just go out and build an app, and then they try to look for customers after, right? So make sure that you very early on are talking to customers, are validating the idea, get any type of traction. Again, I mean, people underestimate the value of blogs and content and writing what you are thinking and putting it out there to receive feedback. And that's probably one of the easiest and cheapest way to start getting feedback for what you're trying to do. So, and again, I mean, this is one thing we do actually in the Founder Institute. We actually try to force founders that come with an idea, very passionate about it, to make sure that they are doing the right thing with just that idea, and even try to come up with 2 or 3 ideas at the beginning and test the 3 of them and see which one of the 3 has more value and has more traction with this kind of really quick test and hypothesis, right? So again, I mean, ideas are free, right? I mean, cheap, and execution is what it will make a difference. So the more you know, the more you go out and talk to people, the better you're going to be in order to get that idea to fruition.
I love that. So, so deeply important. And I know that we do have the what folks are thinking from our participants with regard to the question, like what is your biggest barrier? Can we post that? Perfect. So we have about 40% of folk are trying to figure out how to find the right idea. So this is really interesting. And then we have 29% that are saying finances, 16% time, and then 15% of folk who don't know how to start. So finding the right idea, I think that we can, well, let's dive into that really quickly. And I know that Nell had touched on it. How do you find the right idea? I know that we had talked about how to choose one, but is there a way that you all found like this is the right idea to create a company around?
So I can jump in quickly. I think I think Jacob touched into this at the beginning, right? You have to do some retrospective and kind of a inner introspection in terms of what you are good about, right, and what you are passionate about. And this is a really hard, and I think Nell also mentioned this. I mean, this is not an easy path. It's really hard to do this. So if you're not really passionate about, I mean, there are gonna be 1,000 reasons why you're gonna be you're gonna find to stop at any time, right? And unless you are passionate about it, you're gonna go through all those hurdles and continue doing what you want to do. But again, you have to, I mean, and the other thing is, I mean, you eventually need to become the expert on whatever topic you are building an idea on, right? So if you're not really an expert on that topic, you're going to have to double down on whatever you're doing to become an expert, right? So, I mean, and I see this time and time again, where kind of, I don't know, I mean, I've seen cybersecurity professionals trying to build a nonprofit, which is fine, right? Nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, I will love for a cybersecurity professional to build a cybersecurity company, because that will make sense. But maybe they're not passionate about, and they don't want to do that, and that's okay. But again, if you are going to be going to a nonprofit and you're a cybersecurity professional, then you have to double down, because you're going to have to become an expert on how a nonprofit needs to run and whatever you are trying to do with a nonprofit. So it's a double the effort. And again, it's not a bad choice, but you just have to be aware of what you need to do and do it. But since you're already you already have a profession, you already have a background, you can build on what you already have and start thinking I mean, and maybe you're saying it every day, right? I mean, if we continue with the topic, right? You're a cybersecurity professional, you're seeing many different challenges and issues that you have to face with what you do every day. That's usually the best place to go and see where to find an idea for a company, because that's kind of where you do day in, day out.
Got you. And so, all right, picture that we have our idea. Now we're moving towards actually building the company. I know some of you are co-founders and others of you are just sole founders. Which route do you take? Should you be a co-founder or a founder? Are there reasons why you would choose?
I actually started out as a solo founder, and then was kind of shopping for a co-founder while also starting the company. Got very lucky when I met, I think it was actually the luckiest stroke that we've had with Fully, is that I met Dan, and then realized from that point on how much better it was. So from my perspective, as someone who has done both, granted I was definitely a solo founder for much less time than I've now been a co-founder, I think having someone else it can be very lonely otherwise, I think. I know a good number of of solo founders, and their strongest recommendation against it is that it's lonely. And I think it's because ultimately the buck stops with you. And when you have something that's difficult, you have to deal with it yourself. And in many cases, I feel like our startups become reflections of ourselves, probably more than they should. And you judge yourself very much on how it's doing. But if you can share that with someone else, also the big decisions tend to be doubly as good. I can't tell you how many times I've been very, very convinced of my thought process on something, and then we've had a discussion about it, and I've realized that there's a different point of view. I just I would strongly advocate for a co-founder, knowing, by the way, how hard it is to find a good co-founder. And I went through that experience, and that was I set a drop dead date when I was going to stop looking. It's very stressful. It's very difficult, but I think it's worth it. And I think if you can't find someone, it may actually be a commentary on how well you're describing your idea, or how much your idea may or may not kind of fully resonate with other people. And your co-founder is kind of the first person you convince. So it may actually be something that if you're really having trouble, it may be also a little bit about the idea.
Yeah, I completely agree with Neil. So I think before having a co-founder, I think one thing that I think is really critical is, how do you, like, when you're building an idea, so you're building an idea, the most important thing is, like, you have to reflect your story. So I decided to go with Germany Ventures. I mean, Germany means a good friend, a loyal friend, an honest friend. And in Africa, we always have this issue with corruption, and, like, there's always this perception about people not being trustworthy and honest, right? And I grew up in West Africa, and I saw corruption at its core. I mean, we have a president that's been in power for almost 30 years, right? And there's a lot of like people not giving you the truth, right? And in business, it's just like the petri dish of uncertainty based on lack of trust, right? And one thing that I really want to change in Africa is, with true entrepreneurship, is like building businesses that are based on trust, and people can rely on one another. And I think that's like a story that reflects who I am, where I came from, and that's something that I'm really passionate about, to change the perception of entrepreneurship in Africa, based on the premise that we have to build world-class businesses that can create honest people, ethical people that build very solid products that can sell worldwide. And I know that sounds very macro, but that's something that you have to be thinking about. Like, what represents your true north? Like, what is something that, when you build a business, like, that is Jacob, that is Neil, that is you, and the best version of yourself. And I think that will help you attract the people that will be willing to work with you, because you don't have to pretend. You don't have to say, oh, you don't have to, once you're presenting to your co-founders, right? So I think that's critical, because once you build something that is true to you, you invite the right co-founders, and that will help you build the right business. So, and I think Neil said it, like, finding a co-founder is like marriage, or even like a relationship, right? If you're not true to yourself, the relationship will definitely fall apart, right? And you're going to build a business that, is going to be handicapped. So I think finding a good idea would resonate with the right co-founder, and eventually you don't want to be a single mother. I mean, luckily, if you have, like, a co-parenting home where there's a mom and dad, you definitely have a very good chemistry that, you raise that startup to the point where it's very effective and efficient. But at the end of the day, it's always critical to think of what is something that is really key to myself, and something that I'll be the best version of myself. And you definitely attract the right co-founder, just because you're your true self, and eventually you can build a good business.
So I think that that's a really great segue into this question that a member of our community had just asked, which is, when is the best time to actually bring in a consultant into your product journey? Has anyone ever brought in a consultant in order to flesh out their either product idea, their roadmap, and when was the best time to do that?
So let me kick off with a few thoughts there, um, and I'm actually gonna touch upon the co-founder, which I think is linked to this as well, right? I mean, um, you cannot rush finding a co-founder. It's really hard. It's one of the first things that we advise our founders in the Founder Institute programs is start looking for a co-founder right away, right from the beginning. And I mean, one of the challenges with this is sometimes people is afraid of sharing their ideas, and it shouldn't be the case because again, as we said before, I mean, execution is what makes a difference. And if you're a team, you're probably gonna execute much faster. But again, and again, getting a co-founder is not for everyone, is not for everybody's business. I think sometimes we think about startups as a venture-backed business only, and in reality, you can have many different types of companies, and in many different types of companies, you might not need a co-founder, right? But again, if you are going that route, getting a co-founder is key for many different things, for execution, but also for, I mean, there are much more probabilities of success if you find that co-founder, and because you actually de-risk the business for founders as well. So, but also, I mean, there are many different sources for where the co-founders can come, right? I mean, and I'm going back to the consulting question, because in many cases, you don't want to marry right away, right? You want to date, and a way to date sometimes is by having the person that you are discussing with as a consultant. So you can and see how the relationship goes, right? Sometimes it's really hard to see how you work with that person without actually having worked with that person before. So having that person a consultant, having that person as a mentor, as an advisor, that's very typical. I mean, in many cases, advisors and mentors eventually become co-founders because they just fell in love with the idea, fell in love with the team, and they just want to even get more hands-on and help. Um, so again, and maybe to answer the question, I mean, you have to look for whatever resources you need in order to build your company. And if that requires a consultant, then you can go with that. But the other thing that you need to be mindful about is that and because sometimes consultants are going to just be an expense, which you have to pay for the consultants. But maybe you can also find a way to get these consultants to become part of the team, and then because at the end of the day, the part of the resources that you have, right? Anyway, is the equity that you have in your company, right? So the equity is kind of the way that you trade with other people, and then it's a way for you to. So maybe it's not the consultant that you need. Maybe it's a person that believes in your idea, and you are going to give them equity with some other type of compensation. So again, it depends on what you're trying to build, what resources you have, but a consultant is always a resource, and you just have to be careful and mindful of making sure that your IP is protected, that someone is going to come in the door working for you and is not going to leave with all your IP and because you didn't protect it well. So there's all sorts of considerations and precautions that you have to take, but again, it's a resource that you can use whenever you need it.
So I'm also wondering then, when we're thinking about building out our team, I'd love to know, how did everyone here, how did we scale our business? I know that there might be some business owners in this conversation, and they're at the problem right now where they're trying to scale. So how did you scale your business? How did you grow your team?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I think one thing that we've learned about scale over the past year is that it kind of has a mind of its own. So one thing that Dan and I both say quite a lot is basically we feel like we're either being kind of pulled along by the train or driving the train, but either way, what you want is for your company to be a train, right? You want it to have its own momentum, and then hopefully you are in control of that momentum to a certain extent, right? So hopefully you understand enough about your business, you understand how it operates, and you understand what the levers are, so you do feel like you can have an impact on how fast it grows and make sure that you're able to, resource it. But ultimately, you don't want to be feeling like you're pushing it. And I would say, this is again just the type of company that we chose to build. And as Ignacio said, like this is not every type of company. For us, we chose to build a venture scale company, and we would always prefer to be feeling like we're being dragged along by the train. So basically, what we do is we've spent a lot of time learning what those levers are. And then as soon as we see that something is moving, we know what we have to do to get a little bit out ahead of it to make sure that we maintain the momentum. So as an example, we noticed that our user growth was picking up a lot starting this spring. And we decided in order to get a little bit ahead of that, we reacted to it. We didn't do it ahead of the user growth happening. But as soon as we saw that the user growth was picking up and it was maintaining and yet actually accelerating, we realized we had to do some work on the infrastructure of our product to make sure that we didn't accidentally, wake up at 2 a.m. one day and the whole thing was not working. And so if that makes sense, basically what you need to know what the road signs are to be like, okay, this is happening, therefore we need to jump ahead of it, because you don't want to lose full control. But I think the goal is that you are creating something that does have a little bit of a life of its own, and then you just have to figure out kind of where to tweak. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I know that we only have a couple more minutes together, so I want to target this particular next question to Jacob. If you can let us know, how do you handle your business accounts? Do you have any tips for the community? Do you do all your financing and finances yourself? Do you have an accountant? What tips would you give to our community for doing that?
So, by the way, that's a really good question. I do think you should hire, for that person, I think you should hire a professional to do it. I actually started going, like, I reached out to a family friend to help me out. I think that's the worst idea ever. I think you really have to get even if it's to pay, like, someone to do the taxes, to do the accounting, like, but I think it's so important that if you make a mistake, it can really come back to haunt you. Especially taxes. Oh my God. Just get a really good person to do the taxes, and even pay for it, because I think that's something that you don't want to get into trouble, or just have, like, unpaid. And I do stuff in Africa and stuff, so I really have to make sure I'm keeping the balances here and there, and and the books are actually balanced on both ends. And so I think that's one of the few things from my perspective that you really need to get a professional, like, even if you get like a McKinsey or whatever, like a really good tax accountant to really look into that. For like the financial modeling and financial projections, yes, you can learn to do that by yourself as an early stage company. And, because it's just projections, it's not real numbers. But once you get into your third, fourth, fifth year that you're actually getting VC money, or you're raising like 2 million and all that, then you can hire someone who went to school to do that, right? And make sure like that's the job. And I'm just a little bit going back into like finding a team member, right? I think like your co-founder has to be someone that will ride and die with you. Your first 2-3 employees are people that will be able to explain your company to you such that it's like they went into your head and they could figure out what you're trying to do. Like people that really just get it. You don't need to explain it to them. And there's not like a specific job description, right? It's just like, they just know what you're trying to build, and they just get they'll have a YouTube or an interview and they'll explain your company as well as you do. That's like your first 3 employees. Then once you have a framework, a process in place, you can now hire people that have a job description. So I think it's a stage by stage thing, right? Co-founder, they write and that with you. Like there's nothing there. There's no business. It's just like you guys just talking, building something. The first 3, 4, 5 employees is like, they just love the idea and they're there for it. Like they just love it and they understand it. And there's no job description. Then later on you get a job description once the business is actually like a business, But going back to your question, it's like I think a professional is the key to get your business right.
Perfect. And I hope everyone was taking notes. So the steps to becoming an entrepreneur, make sure that you're finding the right idea and then dive in unapologetically, recognizing what barriers exist for you and taking note of those barriers, making sure that you have the right audience together, making sure that you're choosing the right team, and as well as making sure that you have a professional who is handling all your taxes and business expenses as you scale and as you grow. All right, I know that we only have a couple more minutes, team. I would love for each person to give me 20 seconds on, maybe take 10 seconds and tell us what can we all do to support your work and your company right now? Is it following a particular channel, everyone's Twitters? How do we support you? 10 seconds.
So we have our applications open for the Founder Institute Boston. So if anyone is interested to apply and want to kind of have a structured program to help you launch your company, feel free to check us out and apply. So we have less than a month before our applications are going to be closed. So that's it.
Perfect. We got you, Ignacio. Nell or Jacob?
Yeah. So yeah.
I'll go first. I think for us, it would be great if you could follow Folia Health at Instagram and Twitter. And then if you or someone else that you love has any type of complex condition, please feel free to download the app. It's completely free, and we'd love to see more users.
We will do that. Absolutely. Nell.
So yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys. I have my Twitter account. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I have a podcast called Doers Within Emerging Markets. So I do some interviews with people that do work in emerging markets. But most importantly, I'd love to hear from you guys. So please reach out to me. I'll love to have some interesting conversations. Thank you so much. Guys.
Well, thank you, everyone. Jacob, Nell, Ignacio, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much to our incredible Startup Boston team that we have on here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, and we're so excited. Please feel free to look up and follow all of our Twitter, Instagram, social media page, download the Folia app, and we look forward to hearing from you very soon.